Unfortunately, though, I do agree on certain areas with Senator Burke. I think I cannot agree with this amendment. I think, first of all, in the bill, in terms of de-designation, there is already provision for the Minister to consider, alongside the environmental criteria and environmental factors, as we discussed the last day, issues around national, regional and local economic and social and cultural needs. To my mind, that adequately allows for a balancing and an appropriate consideration of economic, social and cultural, again, and it's crucial here, needs. Where there is a strong community case to be made, the case can be made on the basis of the needs of that area, whereas the amendment, which can be a major benefit to community, enhancement of a community, sporting projects or facilities, golf courses, sports field, greenways, community gain or strategic infrastructural projects. Literally, it is a list of almost anything that you might want to do with some land. And the real concern here is there is still a mind frame, I'm afraid, that looks at our bogs, our not only our raised bogs, but as has been debated earlier, our blanket bogs, our bogs as being somehow empty space that is not already doing work. Our bogs are doing work. They are already of major benefit to a community and indeed to the wider community. And we talk about holding up. In fact, it is those limited areas, given that Ireland doesn't have national forestry in the same way as other areas, given that Ireland doesn't have some of the other environmental carbon sequestration reports, it is already holding up our environment and our ecosystems. This is work that our bogs are doing. And I have a number of concerns with this. I recognise there are certain elements within this amendment that may well be the case. The case, for example, for greenways. If we look at the unfortunate loss of our railways, indeed, for example, the railway line out from Galway to Clifton, which the Minister will be very familiar with, and the strong case that has been made over decades for that to become a greenway. There are cases there where you can look to it, because one of the things, of course, those greenways do is that they do engage with the balance and with the ecosystem and the environment. But unfortunately, those greenways are stuck right alongside golf courses, which internationally are being recognised as something we simply cannot afford to continue in the same way. And now I know that Ireland has many golf courses. I know that some very famous people have golf courses in Ireland. But nonetheless, we are, and we have a green environment and so forth, but they do have an environmental impact. I think that we have some which have already been established, which may be maintained, but they do need to be in balance. And if we look at bogland, particularly blanket bogland, which is hugely saturated with water, the environmental impact required in turning waterlogged blanket bogland into a golf course is immense. It not only does damage in terms of carbon, but it does damage in terms of water retention, in terms of our water tables, in terms of floodplain. If we look at the pesticides needed in respect of any golf course, if we look at the water needs of any golf course, there is a huge issue. I think that we have golf courses well established where that work has already been done. I understand that they may wish to be maintained. I do think that we perhaps privilege them somewhat too much. You may remember, Minister, I raised, perhaps that it was Minister O'Donoghue who would have remembered, I did raise the concerns that we maintained the lower and more preferential VAT rate for members' golf clubs, while we in fact raised it in a number of other areas, including in community exhibitions and local art centres. So, there are questions about how preferential a tax treatment we need to give our golf courses. But what we certainly don't want is a situation whereby large tracts of bogland, if anybody is willing to turn them into a golf course, that's enough of a justification for de-designation. And that, unfortunately, it would be the effect of putting this section here, because it goes into a section which says notwithstanding 18.3, so notwithstanding the other considerations, notwithstanding all the work we've done and that's been discussed into the other areas. So there are real questions here. Minister, I believe, and I would encourage you not to accept this amendment, because I think that you can assure all of the House that in considering national, regional and local economic, social and cultural needs, that you have enough room But what's important about where they are currently placed in the bill is that they are required to be set against the environmental considerations rather than being a standalone provision on their own. I again would maybe perhaps encourage those who are proposing the amendment to consider putting in separate amendments in terms of some of these particular different activities, because there's a big difference between a greenway and a sports field and a sporting project in a general sense, or a strategic infrastructural project. And of course, Minister, you will recall, and we will have a chance to return to this perhaps again, but in relation to the discussion we had on blanket bogs, since our discussion, I went back because you had referenced the fact that this was already discussed and debated at committee stage in the Dáil, and I want to see exactly what was being debated in the Dáil. And what we found was the case being made for the de-designation of blanket bogs was, for many years, for example, we have been trying to build a road through the heart of Connemara, and designation has been a problem. So I would ask, when we say strategic infrastructural projects and say that that's enough of a card to de-designate a bog, would a road through the heart of Connemara be considered a strategic infrastructural project that may perhaps benefit from this new loophole? And again, I would note again, Minister, your own colleague at the time, the then Minister in charge of this area, Humphreys, who said that the Minister should not have the power to de-designate an NHA without having carried out preparatory scientific analysis, which we've discussed hasn't been done yet, and indeed that we would not send out a good signal in terms of how we protect bogs and heritage areas. Minister, there's not simply environmental issues in this. I've spoken about it before. This is a matter of joined-up thinking. We know, for example, that the Common Agricultural Policy is under review. We know that Ireland is going to have to go and make its case under a new and stringent set of rules as to how we meet our targets and what will be ever more specific targets in respect to the Common Agricultural Policy in terms to the greening, in terms of so forth. And many of this bogland does overlap, as was discussed the last day, with farmland, with lands owned by others, by different persons who will be going and seeking subsidies under the Common Agricultural Policy. For them, being able to make the case that they have bogland that is protected, that is being suitably cared for, that is going to strengthen their case, both as individuals, and it will strengthen the case for the community, and it will strengthen the case for Ireland when we go to make our case. So just again, on a very pragmatic level, leaving aside the environmental benefits, there are significant economic benefits from our boglands. And I think that they are of community benefit. Minister, I would urge you to not accept this amendment at this stage. To those, and I know that they are acting in good faith, who are putting forward the amendment, I would ask them to consider potentially breaking the amendment down into specific different areas. So we're not treating very different things, apples and oranges, or maybe grapes and melons, or whatever it is in terms of scale, the same way. That we are recognising that there's a difference here. And again, I unfortunately will not be able to support this amendment, and I'll just signal now my intention that if this amendment is successful, I will be seeking to amend it at report stage.